Jake Collins was the kind of man who didn't need to brag. 20 years as a firefighter had left him with deep lines around his eyes, a calm voice, and a quiet way of commanding respect. He led a small but dedicated fire crew in Asheville, North Carolina, a town nestled between the Blue Ridge Mountains where storms came without warning and neighbors still looked out for one another. Just days ago, one of those storms had torn through the region. It didn't just rain, it poured for over 30 hours. Trees collapsed, roads flooded, homes filled with water. Jake and his crew worked non-stop, carrying elderly couples to safety, pulling kids from flooded basements, relocating pets, and clearing debris. Their rescue truck, an aging but reliable pumper they called Old 42, had seen it all: dents, chipped paint, and the marks of 1,000 emergencies. When the fire station's backup generator failed during the second night of the storm, department policy was clear. The primary rescue engine had to be relocated to a crew member's private property for safekeeping. Jake's home sat on high ground, far from any flooding risk. His driveway was wide and easily accessible. At dawn, barely able to keep his eyes open, soaked and exhausted, Jake drove Old 42 home and parked it in front of his garage. He climbed the front steps, still dripping from the storm, kicked off his boots, and collapsed on the living room couch. The house was quiet, the hum of the storm fading in the background. For the first time in days, he closed his eyes without hearing sirens. But peace didn't last long. When the sun was already high, Jake stumbled to the kitchen, craving coffee. But as he glanced through the window, he froze. A bright orange slip fluttered under the windshield wiper of the fire truck. He rushed outside and grabbed the paper. Unauthorized commercial vehicle parking. $2,000 fine. Immediate removal required. His heart sank. All around, the street was still littered with storm debris. Sandbags sat against porches. Fallen branches blocked sidewalks. The neighborhood wasn't even close to recovering. And now this? The citation was signed by none other than Richard Halston, president of the Willow Glen Homeowners Association, and a name Jake had hoped never to hear again. A retired insurance executive, Halston was notorious for obsessing over neighborhood rules and complaining about emergency vehicles ruining the aesthetic. Jake took a deep breath, then called him. "Hello, Richard," he said as calmly as he could. "I just received a fine for parking the rescue truck outside my home. The station lost power. I followed county procedure. We're still under emergency response." Halston didn't miss a beat. "It's against HOA policy, Jake. Emergency or not, rules are rules. Commercial vehicles are not permitted overnight." Jake clenched his jaw. "Understood," he replied and hung up. He looked back at Old 42, mud still splattered across the bumper, hoses coiled from the last call, and felt something shift inside him. Anger, yes, but more than that, disbelief. After all they'd done, after risking their lives, this is how they were treated? Later that afternoon, Jake returned to the station. The crew had already heard about the fine. Emily Carter, a firefighter with over a decade of service, was furious. "He fined a rescue truck?" she shouted. "We pulled a grandmother and her 2 grandkids from a collapsed porch yesterday." Ben Rodriguez, the engineer on shift, shook his head. "Halston's always had it out for us. Says we bring down the property value." Jake held up the notice. "I spoke to him. He's not budging." The room fell silent. Everyone knew Richard Halston's reputation. He had opposed every community safety drill, pushed to ban siren tests, and even once tried to restrict overnight emergency operations. But finding a firefighter during an active state of emergency? That was something new. Jake knew they couldn't respond with anger. So that evening, he wrote a formal letter to the HOA board. He attached time-stamped photos of the storm, shots of Old 42 evacuating families, and official documents detailing the county's emergency protocols. His tone was measured, respectful, and professional. He ended the email with a final sentence. "I respectfully request that the citation be withdrawn in light of our documented service during an ongoing crisis." The response came the next morning. One sentence. No greeting, no signature. Rules will be enforced equally, no exceptions. Jake read it twice. No exceptions, even for a rescue truck, even in a disaster zone. When he shared the email with his crew, the station buzzed with disbelief. The fine wasn't just unfair, it was personal. And it wasn't over. 2 days later, Jake received a second notice, an additional $1,000 fine for every day the truck remained. He looked up from the letter and met Emily's eyes across the break room. "That's enough," he said quietly. The fire station wasn't buzzing with sirens that morning. It was buzzing with quiet fury. Jake sat at the kitchen table while his team circled around him, eyes sharp, backs straight. They were tired, still recovering from the storm, but now fueled by something different. Not adrenaline, not duty, outrage. Emily paced near the coffee pot. "We should go public," she muttered. "This guy's crossed every line, and now he's piling on the fines like we're criminals." Ben leaned against the counter. "Jake, he's not just attacking you, he's disrespecting all of us." Jake rubbed his forehead. He wasn't the type to act impulsively, but the line had been crossed. This wasn't about a parking violation. It was about power and pride, and about someone using rules to humiliate those who served. "All right," Jake finally said. "If he wants to play by the book, then we'll use the whole book." He spent the afternoon combing through North Carolina's emergency response laws, HOA statutes, and county fire codes. And there, tucked into the fire access regulations, he found it, a detail that changed everything. By state law, any private community under emergency declaration must ensure visible, well-lit perimeter fencing for emergency vehicle access. No exceptions. And guess what? Willow Glen's prized wooden fence, Halston's pride and joy, didn't have a single emergency-compliant light. Even worse, trees had grown thick along the street-facing side, completely blocking night visibility for first responders. Jake gathered evidence fast. He and Ben walked the perimeter that evening, taking photos of overgrown branches, shadowy corners, and unlit fence posts. Then he compiled it all: maps, time-stamped images, county guidelines, and filed a formal complaint with the city's fire inspection department. The inspector, someone who knew Jake and had seen his team in action during the storm, listened carefully. "We'll get someone out there within 48 hours, he promised. And they did. The inspection report was firm. The Willow Glen HOA was in violation of multiple safety requirements, and corrective action was required immediately. Jake didn't celebrate. He had no interest in revenge. Instead, he did something more powerful. He offered help. In a formal letter to the HOA board and county safety office, he wrote, "To assist in meeting emergency safety standards, Station 8 is willing to provide temporary floodlighting at the affected perimeter until full compliance is reached." The county approved it. The HOA didn't respond. That Saturday evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Engine 42 rolled up to the edge of Willow Glen. The crew moved swiftly but respectfully. Ben and Emily unloaded 6 towering floodlights, the kind used for major highway accidents. Tripods were raised, cables rolled out, and with a collective flip of switches, the fence lit up like a stadium. Neighbors peeked from windows, blinking at the sudden brightness. Some stepped outside, whispering to one another. Others just stared. Every inch of Richard Halston's cherished wooden fence was now illuminated in blinding white light, every crack, every flaw, every twisted branch now plain for all to see. Jake stood with his arms crossed beside the truck, not smug, not angry, just steady. Emily handed out county-issued safety flyers to the gathering crowd. "This is part of emergency compliance," she explained gently. "We're just doing our job." And she meant it. Word spread fast. A local CBS affiliate showed up with cameras. The footage aired that night, firefighters calmly installing lighting after being fined for saving lives. The segment ended with a simple question: when did rules become more important than service? By Sunday morning, the story had gone viral. Neighbors posted photos. Support poured in from across the state. Someone even made a meme, a firefighter holding a hose in one frame, holding a parking ticket in the next. But the public wasn't laughing. They were outraged. Jake's inbox filled with thank you messages. Local businesses offered to pay the fines. Veterans groups sent letters of support. But still, the HOA board remained silent. Until Monday. Under mounting pressure, Willow Glen's board held an emergency meeting. Residents packed the clubhouse. Questions flew. Where did this rule come from? Why fine someone during an emergency? And why was the HOA now under fire for their own safety violations? That afternoon, an official letter arrived at Station 8. No signature, no apology. Just 6 words. All fines against Mr. Collins rescinded. Jake read the letter out loud. His crew barely reacted. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about something deeper. And the lights? They stayed on. The lights stayed on. Night after night, the edge of Willow Glen shone like a construction zone at midnight. Floodlights bathed Richard Halston's precious fence in pure white glare. Neighbors got used to the glow. Some even found it funny. Others weren't so amused. And that's when things began to turn. Jake Collins had won the public's respect. But behind the scenes, new tensions brewed. At the firehouse, morale was high, but Jake was running on fumes. He handled interviews, thank you notes, and new requests from local officials, all while still leading emergency calls. He never complained, but the strain was there, in the dark circles under his eyes and the quiet way he now drank his morning coffee. And then came the first real threat. One morning, a crew member found the power cables to the floodlights sliced clean through. No storm, no accident, sabotage. Jake filed a report with the local police, and a patrol was dispatched to monitor the site. They didn't catch anyone, but the message was clear. Someone had had enough of the lights. 2 days later, it escalated. A handwritten letter appeared, taped to the door of Station 8. Real heroes don't show off. Turn off the lights before someone else does. There was no signature, no return address, just sloppy handwriting on torn paper. Jake didn't share it with the press. He didn't post it online. But that night, for the first time, he questioned everything. Maybe it was time to stop. Maybe the point had been made. Maybe, just maybe, keeping the lights on was doing more harm than good. At the firehouse, his crew noticed the shift. Emily approached him quietly. "Jake, don't let this break you." He gave a tired smile. "It's not about me anymore, Em. I just don't want this to turn into something it was never meant to be." But she wasn't convinced. Neither was Ben. And neither were the growing number of firefighters across the county who had sent messages of support. Jake had become a symbol, not just of defiance, but of honor. The next blow came from an unexpected place, the mayor's office. Jake was called to a closed-door meeting at City Hall. He went alone, in uniform. The assistant city manager greeted him with a polite but serious tone. "Jake, we appreciate everything you and your team have done. We truly do. But the situation in Willow Glen is escalating. The media's digging deep, and now other HOAs are starting to call. Legal departments are getting nervous. This might be the time to, well, ease up." Jake sat in silence for a long moment. "Let me get this straight," he said slowly. "We're being asked to stop enforcing a safety mandate because it's making people uncomfortable?" The official shifted in his seat. "It's not a demand, just a suggestion." Jake didn't argue. He nodded, shook hands, and walked out. That night, he stood alone by the fence, staring at the lights. He thought about everything: the storm, the rescues, the fines, the letters, the threats. He thought about the old man in the wheelchair they'd carried through knee-deep water, the kids with asthma they'd rushed to a shelter. He thought about all the people they'd helped while others stayed dry and silent behind their fences. And then, without a word, he turned and walked back to the truck. But the next morning, something changed. A new crew arrived, not from Station 8, but from 3 towns over. And they didn't come empty-handed. They brought more lights, extra cables, security cameras, portable barriers, and one big sign that read, "Emergency Access Zone. Do not obstruct." Jake hadn't called them. They came on their own. Word had spread, not just about the fence or the fines, but about something bigger, about standing up, about doing what was right, even when it was inconvenient. Fire departments from across the county had joined in, unofficially, quietly, but without hesitation. Emily met Jake in the break room that afternoon. "Looks like you're not alone anymore." Jake nodded. "I never was. I just forgot for a second." That evening, the media returned, drawn by the growing show of solidarity. This time, Jake didn't speak. Emily did. And so did Ben. And so did firefighters from other towns, all repeating the same message. We don't serve for recognition, but we won't be punished for doing our jobs. As the sun set, the lights turned on again, brighter than ever. Jake stood back and watched as the glow spread across the street, over the rooftops, and into every corner of the neighborhood. No one came to cut the wires that night, but the question still hung in the air. How would it end? Saturday night came softly. The air in Willow Glen was still, the streets quiet, except for the low hum of portable generators. The sun slipped behind the trees, and as dusk settled over the neighborhood, Engine 42 pulled into position. For the last time. This time, it wasn't just Station 8 on the scene. Crews from 4 different towns had come, off duty, on their own time, wearing department polos and steady faces. They lined the sidewalk near the fence, calm, professional, united. Jake Collins stood quietly near the front of the truck, arms crossed, eyes steady. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Around him, the others handled the setup, raising the lights, adjusting the angles, checking connections. Everything ran smoothly. Then, at precisely 8:30, the fence lit up again. And that's when it happened. A silver sedan pulled up near the corner. The crowd, smaller than before but still present, watched as Richard Halston stepped out. He wasn't flanked by lawyers. He wasn't dressed for battle. He wore jeans, a jacket, and a look Jake hadn't seen before: humility. He walked slowly toward the crowd. Someone handed him a microphone. At first, he just stood there, head down. Then, in a low, clear voice, he said, "I was wrong." Silence. I allowed my pride to speak louder than my reason. I enforced rules without compassion, and I turned what should have been gratitude into confrontation. I owe an apology, not just to Captain Collins, but to every firefighter standing here tonight. No one moved. Jake didn't blink. Halston continued. "This morning, I submitted my resignation as HOA president. I've also worked with the board to officially void all fines issued. And finally, I've asked that a permanent plaque be installed at our neighborhood entrance, one that honors the service and sacrifice of the first responders who stood with us during the storm." Someone clapped, then another. Soon, quiet applause filled the air. It wasn't thunderous, it was respectful, earned. Jake stepped forward. He didn't say much, just nodded once and shook Halston's hand. It wasn't a moment of triumph, it was a moment of restoration. Over the next few weeks, the temporary lights remained. The HOA funded the proper installation of emergency-compliant lighting along the perimeter. The city inspected and approved the changes. The fence, once a symbol of division, now stood as a quiet reminder of what had nearly been lost and what had been found again. Neighbors began greeting each other more. Some offered to bring food to the station. A few left thank you notes on the truck. One little boy stopped by with his mother and handed Jake a drawing. A fire truck, a big sun, and the words, "Thank you, heroes," in crayon. And then, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, Jake found a package on his desk. Inside was a handcrafted plaque. Burned into the wood were the words, "Captain Jake Collins, lighting the way." Jake smiled and turned to Emily, who leaned against the doorway. "Ben made it," she said softly. Jake picked it up, ran a hand across the surface, and exhaled. You know, he said, sometimes you don't fight fire with water. Sometimes you fight it with light. The crew gathered around. No speeches, no ceremony, just pride. The kind you feel when you know, without a doubt, that you stood up when it mattered most. And that's how it ended. No headlines, no parades, just a town a little more connected, a neighborhood a little more humble, a crew a little more proud, and a simple truth left behind. Real heroes don't need to shout. They just show up, again and again, and do the right thing. If this story moved you, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes in doing the right thing, and don't forget to follow our channel. We've got more stories that prove everyday courage still exists, and that light always finds a way through the darkness.